The U.S. Navy was tracking a narco submarine around 1300 hours local time. The submarine was unaware that it had already been captured 400 meters northeast of the Galapagos Islands. This sub would arrive in maritime channels in roughly 4 hours, where it might disappear among 1,000 genuine contacts. However, the crew of this circling HC-130J was unaware that this amazing narco sub had a secret weapon that might escalate a routine interception into a three-way maritime confrontation. The radar operator watched a contact that hardly existed as he gazed at his screen. Like someone turning on and off a light switch in a different room, 3 sweeps are visible and 9 are gone. Almost nothing was returned by this contact. There were just sporadic flickers on what must have been a fiberglass hull, until waves revealed metal outboards. The entire tale was told in 8 knots. This far from anywhere, no respectable person moved at such a leisurely pace. 3 tons of contraband were riding low enough to wash the deck with each swell thanks to 8 knots. The bearing matched well-known smuggling routes from Colombia to Mexico, where goods were traded and prices tripled. There are no shipping lanes, no fishing grounds for 200 miles, and only the obvious reason to be here. The ghost trail solidified after the tactical coordinators switched to thermal imagery. These unobtrusive 18-inch above-water vehicles are painted gray-blue to blend in with the ocean and are undetectable from a distance of 500 meters, with the exception of the technology that is currently looking down from a height of 5 meters. However, identifying it was the simple part. Reaching it was a different matter entirely. Simple math was the issue. If her turbines didn't object, the Seneca, the closest Coast Guard vessel, might go 20 knots. It took her 2.5 hours to intercept at its fastest speed, flank speed, when she was 50 miles away. At this pace, the smugglers would arrive in crowded seas in 4. This type of math meant that unless you had anything that flew instead of sailed, the mission would fail. As soon as the intercept data arrived, Ceneaga's flight deck descended into controlled anarchy. Pre-flight checks were shortened in half, and the helicopter crew completed their scramble in a matter of minutes. While the rotors were still strapped down, weapons were loaded. Fuel calculations are written on kneeboards that have previously been sprayed. The trip to the intercept location, which was 150 miles away, took roughly an hour. Although the MH-65 had enough fuel for 3.5 hours of flight, battle maneuvering consumed fuel far more quickly. They would have to stop the smugglers, watch over them for 3 hours until Seneca showed up, and then find a way to have enough gasoline to keep an eye on them while they boarded. The same response, paid land with fumes in the tanks and prayers on their lips, kept appearing on the fuel computer. As the pilots went through starting, the gunner examined the M240 mount. The traverse motor was stuck solid yesterday. Salt corrosion in the bearings was liberated with hope and penetrating oil. Everything on a ship was finally consumed by salt. During operations, it simply preferred to consume vital systems. With margins expressed in gallons rather than miles, the chopper lifted off and banked toward an intercept. The pilot knew that every minute at high power meant 2 minutes less endurance, so he watched his fuel gauge in the same way that gamblers watched their final chips. Seneca dashed through the Pacific swells in the meanwhile. Her skipper was aware that she needed to arrive before the smugglers could destroy any evidence. The smugglers only needed to turn one valve for the entire sub to begin filling with water. Thus, it was now a race against time. They were unable to allow that to occur. At 14:15 local time, the MH-65 passed overhead and descended through clear skies in the direction of the narco sub. The rotor wash struck the ocean like an unseen hammer as the pilot lowered them to 200 feet. Beneath them, the water became a jumble of foam and spray. Outward radiating waves caused the low-profile vessel to rock and swell in ways it never agreed to. The gunner began the warning shot process by grabbing the controls of the M240. The mount remained still. He gave it another go. Nothing. The traverse motor was frozen solid at a 45-degree angle away from the helicopter's nose. In a system intended for 2, Salt had crystallized in the bearings, producing 40 pounds of resistance. They had a machine gun that was unable to aim and required 2 hours to maintain position. Without consulting anyone, the pilot made the change. In order to align the frozen gun, he put the chopper in a sliding hover and flew sideways at 50 knots. These Coast Guard pilots don't always follow the manual, even though it's not anything you'd find in any manual. They rely on what works. Immediately, the gasoline flow increased to 95 gallons from 76. However, they were more in need of those warning shots than they were of optimal fuel efficiency. The first burst entered the water 100 meters before the narco sub. The smugglers continued to travel at 8 knots as if nothing had happened. Perhaps they believed that the sideways approach was a sign of a malfunctioning piece of equipment. They were just partially correct. Although the device had malfunctioned, the crew hadn't. While the gunner attempted to muscle the mount free, the pilot pulled them around for another pass while maintaining the awkward angle. Coast Guard gunners are both patient and unyielding. 50 meters from the bow is the second explosion. There is still no reply from below. 10 meters is the third pass. The smugglers most likely felt the impacts through the hole because the rounds struck close enough. That resolved the issue. Immediately, all of their outboards shut off. After the incessant drone, there was an odd silence. While 3 guys below pondered their life decisions, the narco sub went from hardly moving to still, drifting on the swells. A 200-foot orbit pattern was established by the helicopter. Like a broken weather vane, frozen firearms continued to point sideways. They had brought the ship to a halt. That was the first step. The second step was to halt it. Additionally, the smugglers' friends had different ideas. After 12 minutes of holding, fresh issues appeared on the radar. 2 contacts are arriving at 40 knots from the southwest. They would arrive in 12 minutes at that speed. While maintaining his orbit over the narco sub, the pilot began to split his focus between what he was protecting and what was approaching. Cartels routinely use protection boats. They ran 10 to 15 minutes behind their subs, near enough to offer assistance, but distant enough to deny any involvement in the event that something went wrong. These weren't rescue boats. They were outboard and attitude-driven insurance policies. The boats began their own circle after closing to 4 miles, keeping a distance of 2,000 meters, just outside the effective small weapons range, but yet close enough to be significant. The pilot had a clear view of them. Take a swift boat with several passengers on board. In an attempt to determine what the helicopter would do if pushed, they were testing and probing. Before the pilot swung the nose in its direction, one boat rushed toward the narco sub, closing to 1,500 meters. The chopper pointing at you had significance even with a damaged gun mount. His buddy quickly stepped in from the other side as the boat veered off. Pack tactics, attempting to divert the helicopter's focus. With unwavering will, the gunner continued to battle the M240 mount in an attempt to liberate it. He would wrestle the cannon toward the direction of each approaching boat, making maybe 10 degrees of movement before the salt prevailed once more. It's likely that the defense boats possessed weaponry of their own. Cartel staple weapons were AK-47s. Accuracy was dubious at this range, but you still don't want to take lucky shots. This dance went on for 15 minutes. Boats are coming and going, helicopter turning to follow them. Watching their backup probe American reactions is the narco subcrew. While Seneca was still more than 90 minutes out, the pilot was burning fuel at combat power settings and watching his gauge drop. The protection boats were also math-savvy. They were attempting to wait out the helicopter's fuel condition, make it depart for the ship, or take a chance by swimming home. The boats made one more forceful pass, closing to 800 meters at the same time from opposing directions. The pilot had to decide which boat to take on. He did not select either. Rather, he ascended to 500 feet to demonstrate that he could use both if necessary. It was an obvious message. This helicopter was not going away, broken gun or not, outnumbered or not. It was captured by the protection boats. They accelerated, approaching international seas at 45 knots after turning southwest and opening their throttles. They had successfully forced the hilo to burn through fuel it lacked, but they had not saved any lives or recovered any cargo. The narco subcrew had ceased to move under them. However, stopping a ship and actually boarding it were two quite different issues, particularly when the waves were growing and time was of the essence. When Seneca eventually showed up, he built a steel barricade between the escape and the narco sub. As the deck crew prepared the RHIB for launch, she slowed to 5 knots. The building was 8 feet high, and the oceans were 6 feet deep. The barometer was rapidly dropping, but it wasn't bad yet. It would be impossible to launch in an hour or two. The 7-meter-long rigid hull inflatable boat, or RHIB, was carried over the lake by the David, the crane you see above. The boat weighs 8,600 pounds, and its operators are suspended from a steel line that is almost twice as heavy. In moving seas, static rating was meaningless. The load was increased by each wave that passed beneath. Tension on the descent and compression on the ascent. The crane operator counted the seconds between crests while observing the wave pattern. Dropping between waves took 8 seconds. Dropping on one was 6 seconds. It happened in between sets. The operator hit the release after the ocean flattened for around 4 seconds. The RHIB hit the water after falling 6 feet. Engines are already in motion. Before the second wave came, the coxswain driver of the RHIB pushed the throttles, shooting at 20 knots away from the Seneca's hull. It was not fun to be crushed between 4,500 tons of steel. The helicopter stayed in a 200-foot orbit. There are now 134 gallons of fuel. Before changing from an helo to a submarine, the pilot had completed the calculations, seen the boarding, provided overwatch, and landed back on the Seneca. The frozen gun was no longer relevant. All the weaponry this circumstance required was the RHIB, which was approaching at 45 knots with 6 rifles on board. The coxswain used a maritime tactic known as controlled collision to get the RHIB alongside the narco sub. He aimed for the midship at 45 knots, then abruptly turned around and pivoted to starboard, causing the boat to spin 90 degrees while slowing down. As both vessels rose and descended on separate wave cycles, the RHIBs smashed sideways into the narco sub, the inflatable collar absorbing the impact and now grinding into the hole. When the boats reached the same height, the first operator leaped. This 2-second opening would not recur for 8 more. He hit wet fiberglass hard. 40 pounds of equipment and body armor makes it challenging to maintain equilibrium. However, his weapon was already raised, searching for dangers as his legs stabilized. In case these smugglers had any brilliant ideas, the other officers offered cover. The smugglers were hauled out one by the officers until all 3 were on deck, and another officer could investigate the area to make sure no one else was hiding there. The Seneca found the RHIB and hilo safely after scouring the ship. Additionally, the criminal organizations learned a lesson that day, even though they were already planning their next sub. A completely new approach to conducting business has emerged since Trump took office. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel WW2 Revealed for more incredible stories and untold moments from history.